university in Quebec, open to all society, all people.
That is so wonderful.
For families and circle of expertise, elders, people from the Canadian society, business, everybody. We're thinking how we can approach them and contribute to have a space that we can share knowledge and keep alive the Indigenous knowledge.
Wonderful. That sounds magical.
Amazing. Amazing. But if it's a secret, okay. Okay.
So Senator Pate just had a few technical issues, but she's logging on now, I've been told.
Oh, I see her joining now. Beautiful.
Perfect.
All right. So we'll be 2 minutes behind, but I think we can make it work. Senator Pate, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry for the issues. We appreciate the last minute login from you. And I'm just going to, I'll put a star next to your name as well so it pops up at the top of my screen because you are all very special. Perfect. Okay. Senator Pate, are you able to hear us?
I am, and I apologize. I had to loan my headset to a witness for one of the committees yesterday. Can you hear me all right? I don't want to. Yep. Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, you sound great. All right. So we have all of the big players here. So we are going to go ahead and get started with the live event. We are also going live to YouTube. So we will have a few schools joining us and watching there as well and later on. So welcome and good morning. Thank you so much for joining me for our roundtable on reconciliation. This is always such an amazing event to run with the Canadian Senate, and I'll probably say it a million more times today, but thank you very much to our three senators, Senator Audette, Senator Duncan, and Senator Pate for joining us today. It's so wonderful to have you all. So I'd like to begin myself with a land acknowledgement. I am joining from Amiskwaciwâskahikan, which is colonially known as Edmonton, Alberta, and it's on Treaty 6 territory. This is a traditional gathering place and traveling route to many people, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and the Nakota Sioux. Since we're joining on a virtual platform, I would like to also take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the traditional territories that we're joining from across Turtle Island. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation peoples that call this land home. Now, we do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. June is National Indigenous History Month, and this is a great opportunity for everyone in Canada to do more for reconciliation. I really hope that today's discussion will bring about some further actions in our communities, our places of worship, our workplaces, schools, and governments. We must remain committed to our ongoing work of establishing and maintaining respectful relationships to the better lives of everyone who shares these lands. Now, just a little shout out to all of the schools that maybe are able to join us here live today, but maybe will be watching later. We had a lot of interest in this event. So you'll see we have a lot of schools from across Canada, but even internationally that want to learn more about the reconciliation process that's happening here. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody got a little shout out on our screen here. And I did have a question off the top about the agenda. So just a couple of reminders. We do have a very full agenda. We did end up moving our event to 1 hour. So we will have a focus on the questions from our representative school, Mary Butterworth, VSS, and Sal Halley, who was not able to make it this morning, but if they do hop on, we will try to grab a question from them as well. If we have other schools joining on YouTube or on Zoom, you are welcome to put some questions in the chat. There's no guarantee we'll get to them today, but we will make sure that we forward them to the Cengage team to share with the senators so you can get answers to them as well. And just a little bit of an idea of how the event will run. I'll give each of our senators, starting with Senator Audette, about 2 to 3 minutes to do a welcome statement. Then we'll move into our question period from our schools. And then we'll have a last final thought from each of our senators before we all take a group picture and move on from there. So that's kind of all of the sharing that I have to do. We've got all of our housekeeping out of the way. So we can go ahead and get right to the event. So I will pass the mic over first to Senator Audette to go ahead and give us a welcome statement.
Merci beaucoup. Tjenashka maintenant, Chapo Hugado. Kasno Wasadak Mac Nuijewagan, Nenjen Ishkut, Sénatrice Duncan, and Pate. Merci, thank you. So cute and so proud for me. It's always a yes when people across Canada, student, and my favorite one is the youth, when we can share our passion and then connect among us that at the end of the day, the Senate, it belongs to you. It's your home, it's your house, it's your place, even though if it's far from where you live. But with connection like this one, it's awesome. Thank you, Sangash, also my favorite team. Udindan the Siwa li Wendat. I'm in the Wendat community, Wendat people are welcoming me every day here, of course. And for thousands of years, other nations share that space and that place back and forth with the big river, of course. So the Innu Nation, Atikamekw, Anishinaabe, or Maliseet, or even some other nation from far, far past here in the moment of the history that we call now Canada. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. I have two little granddaughter, 5 young adult or teenagers, but they think they're adult, and of course two men. So and I adopted also people from different nations as a traditional kukum. And I'm at the Senate. It's been almost 2 years. I have 2 mentors here, amazing women, but it's a place for me where I can learn, educate, or try to change something that was done in the history of Canada. So if I want to contribute and change, I think I'm at the right place and surrounded by right people. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's so nice to have you. I will pass it on next to Senator Pate for a welcome message.
Great, thank you very much. And it's an honor to join you. I'm sitting here on the shores of the Kitchissippi in the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, otherwise known to many folks as Ottawa. I'm in my Senate office, and I'm very pleased to be joined by this amazing group of young people from all over the place, and of course my fabulous colleagues and all of you, and thank you to Cengage for organizing this. I mean, when I think of these, I'm also a mom. I'm not a grandmother, not officially. I've been adopted as a grandmom by some folks, and a partner, and you know, I've spend a lot of time trying to unlearn the colonial messages, ideas, thinking that have been, you know, drummed into me from being a very young child. And I think of reconciliation as action that we need to be taking every day in our lives to undo those, but not just undo, take action to actually achieve the kind of substantive equality, meaning creating opportunities for people to have the same options that the most privileged in our communities have. So if you look at what the people who have the most power, money, authority can do, we need to make all of that more equal so that every one of you are all leaders, all of you young people. By the time you're in leadership positions as adults, we hopefully will have created more space for that kind of equality to happen. And that's a big part of what I see as my work and the work of all of us. But part of the reason I came to the Senate was to try and do that work. So I want to thank you all for being here. I'm really looking forward to your questions, and you're our future and you are our leaders. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And I'll pass the last to Senator Duncan.
Thank you so much to Cengage for organizing this event, and especially to the students who are here attending and to their educators. I am so appreciative of the opportunity to speak with you and to share experiences. And to my learned colleagues, it's always a pleasure and an opportunity, a privilege to work with you. I truly appreciate it. I'm speaking to you from my office in Ottawa. I am the Yukon's senator. And I'm the mother of 2 adult children, no grandchildren at this point. I have served in the Yukon Legislative Assembly for 10 years and also as a public servant. During my time as serving in the Yukon Legislative Assembly, I signed some land claim agreements, and I worked closely with the Yukon First Nations. And the Yukon only has 1 senator, and one of our duties as senators is to represent our region. So I'm representing the Yukon, and you may have heard the expression, the Yukon that leads, and we truly are leaders in terms of reconciliation. And June is Indigenous History Month, and our history in working with First Nations is incredibly important for the country of Canada, because in 1973, 50 years ago in February, Elijah Smith and a delegation of Yukon First Nations, some of whom are still with us, presented then Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau with the document called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. That document was a land claim agreement, essentially, and it outlined so many areas where Yukon First Nations had presented a position to Canada saying, let's negotiate a land claim agreement. We now have 11 of our 14 First Nations have signed self-government and land claim agreements. And what that means is that there is a government, so Canada, government, to government, Yukon, to government, Council of Yukon First Nations relationship. So the 3 governments work together on education, on healthcare, on control and development of resources. We've created a working relationships. It's still a work in progress, and not all First Nations in the Yukon have an agreement. However, we really have led Canada in terms of working towards reconciliation. My colleague Michelle Odette will also share with you that, for example, Yukon was the first place where we began the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry, was in the Yukon. And our self-government agreements lead the country in many, many ways. I'm happy to share that experience. And as I said, it's a work in progress. However, it is an experience I truly believe is worth sharing, and I try and do that whenever I can. So thank you again. I'm so looking forward to your questions and to sharing this experience with all of you. It's truly an honor, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all 3 of our senators for those wonderful welcome messages. A great way to kind of frame the discussion for today. I would like now to give a moment before we get into their questions to have both of our representative schools introduce themselves and let us know where they're joining from. So I will pass it first to Mary Butterworth. If you could go ahead and let us know where you're joining from, and then we'll pass it off to our other school before we start with our questions.
Hello. Hi, this is Mary Butterworth. We're joining from Edmonton, Alberta, and we're all really excited to be here and just to debate and talk to you guys about this. Do you want us to do the land acknowledgement too?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll do it.
Yep. I did tell the students to make sure they come right up to the microphone, so this is perfect.
Yeah.
My name is Emily, and we acknowledge that we are in Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Tsul'kayu', Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries.
Thank you so much. It's great to have you. They have some amazing questions coming up, so we'll pass it right along so we've got lots of time. I will call on next our school, VSS. Unfortunately, they don't have a working video today, but you can go ahead and give us your land acknowledgement as well.
Hello, this is VSS from Attawapiskat in Northern Ontario. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on Treaty 9 territory, and the land on which we are situated on is the traditional territory of the Ojibwe, Chippewa, Oji-Cree, Cree, Algonquin, and Métis peoples.
Thank you very much. And VSS, while we have you here, before we make another kid from Mary Butterworth run up to the camera, I'll go ahead and let you ask the first question.
Thank you. Our first question is from our grade 12 students, and they're taking the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit governance course. They'd like to know what changes you would like to see with respect to First Nations communities practicing sovereignty, self-determination, and self-governance in education. For example, the Ontario Ministry of Education would not allow our teachers to design a specific test that would be Indigenous friendly.
Thank you very much. Now, I think the best way to do this, just in the keeping our time in mind, if a senator would like to speak on a question, the easiest thing to do is just to unmute yourself so I can see that you're ready to speak, and I will call on you to the floor, and we will limit it to 1 to 2 responses per question. So if you are interested in providing a response, you can just unmute yourself and I'll be able to see that you would like to speak. Although I do, Senator Audette, I know that yours is a little bit trickier, so I'll give you a moment if you'd like to share on this one.
I was going to say, Kim, she lives in Ontario and she knows this issue well.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm horrified that the position this government is taking. As a senator in Ontario, even though I've lived in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, I was born in Quebec, and I now live in Ontario, and I've also lived in Nova Scotia. I am a senator here, and I feel a responsibility. So the fact that we say we are committed to reconciliation, we say we want to move forward, and then we interfere with the ability of sovereign nations to actually exercise governance, whether it's through education systems, through language systems, whether it's through child welfare, whether it's every stage of the process, shows how we're not really willing to give over that power and resources that I was trying to, describe at the beginning. And so I think that's outrageous. I would actually love to get more information about it so that outside of this process, perhaps I can do something here in Ontario, because for the first time, I went and met with folks at the Ontario legislature, and I'm actually meeting with a few of the MPPs coming up. So this is excellent timing. So please do send me more information about what was proposed.
And if you can add me on that chain of information, of email and information, because of Attawa-Piskat, across Canada, that we call Canada today now, we know that we have to honor the dream of Shannon to make sure that education is normal. It should be for everybody and access to everybody. But at the same time, why I was saying we need to have an Indigenous university, it's to break those barriers that many First Nation or Northern community are facing, no matter where we live. So if we can walk with you at the Webscat, if we can be an ally, a friend or a partner, for sure we are there, and for sure we can push. But if the school send a YouTube video or a TikTok, because we're not allowed with TikTok anymore, but something that is visual, like Shannon did, and making sure that your message, Ontario hears it, because when they don't hear, it's good for them. But when your voice is loud, they rethink sometimes what they do or say. In a good way.
Yeah, a great idea for a project after this to get a video together of the issues that they're facing at that school and send forward to our Cengage team to share with you all. I think that's a wonderful idea. Thank you for your ideas. We'll pass it next to Mary Butterworth to go ahead and ask our second question.
Hi, my name is Ayush, and my question is, out of the 13 calls to actions that have been completed, why is it that none of them are associated with healthcare? What are the huge step backs that cause these health-related calls to action to be still refused?
So do we have, I see I have a couple senators. We'll pass it to Senator Duncan first to share her thoughts.
The immediate response is that Canada, it's federalism itself, and healthcare is a provincial responsibility. And what is often overlooked is that Canada is the 14th province at the table when it comes to healthcare, because they have a fiduciary responsibility for First Nations healthcare. So what you need to be aware of is that non-insured health benefits is where Canada pays for healthcare benefits for First Nations people. And it in some provinces, it's not always the same, and benefits that are extended to non-First Nations people. One of the things that, one of the situations that I would share with you is that when a First Nations person goes to a hospital in the Yukon, one of the questions they're asked is, do you identify as First Nations, Inuit, or Métis? If they identify as First Nations, there's a First Nations healthcare worker that is in the hospital on a full-time basis, who will stay and assist that individual when they are, whether they're admitted or if they end up staying at the hospital. There's also traditional foods that are made available. So hunters in the fall or gatherers who have traditional berries available or who have got a moose will supply it to the hospital. Now, I sit on the National Finance Committee, and so when Health Canada and Indigenous Services comes before the National Finance Committee, I can say to them, how are you taking the example that the Yukon has set and ensuring that money is available to provinces to do the same thing and to implement the same programs or same type of programs to learn from this experience? A couple of years ago, they told me that yes, they were following up on that. I have not seen it yet. And we have witnessed some terrible, terrible situations in Quebec. For example, Joyce Echequan. Had she had a First Nations individual assigned to work with her, perhaps we would not have had that experience. And that's why it's so important to share across the country what we do right and where we can work together to implement new programs. So I think it's why we haven't seen better outcomes is we're still not implementing lessons learned, but we're working on it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Senator Pater, Senator Audette, do you have thoughts you'd like to share on this topic? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, we lost your audio, Senator Audette.
When hundreds of years of thinking, this is how I do things and this is how it's going to happen. Even if we do inquiries, commission, or report, the bias is so deep and the status quo, it's hard to change. But I can see some change for the past 30 years as an Indigenous woman. So there's hope. It takes too long, but the change is happening. But more we have people like you who will be the next sitting where we are or other places, making laws stronger or more efficient, we will say, finally, we're telling the truth here in Canada, or we're acting on what we were told during those commission or inquiry. So sometimes I'm not patient, and sometimes I pray a lot or I cry, but I prefer to stay on hope and feeling that we're going the right thing.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Great. I will pass it next to VSS to ask our next question, please.
Our second question is, how are new laws created in Canada? And how is it decided as to which new laws are introduced to the law books, codes, or constitution?
I think that's a great transition from speaking about laws that we would like. So if we could give our students a little bit of an idea of how laws are passed and the role the Senate has. Senator Pate, I'll pass to you first.
No, have Michelle go first.
Okay, sounds good.
For me, if I was, how can I say? Right now, it's going very fast, and sometimes people believe that, oh, we don't need to hear from Indigenous people. But we're everywhere. It's transversal. You want to talk about environment or economic or art, we can be and we should be everywhere. And sometimes when they believe, good mind, good heart, bon, let's do this law, and we're not involved, some will say not consult or not co-creating and co-writing the legislation, there's an impact the next day it's adopted. So this is why we have new and more senators, probably the same thing in the other chamber. But when it's debated, I don't need to debate. People debate instead of me that we should have been there a long time ago and we should be included. So I'm not going to tell you the technicality on how we do laws, but how we do laws in my heart is if I walk or denounce something, the Senate or the Parliament can bring this and make a law with that. So your voice and your passion or your concern can become a law.
And that's a brilliant explanation. I'm going to give you a slightly more technical and blunt explanation. The laws that are prioritized by the government tend to be what will get them elected, what they've campaigned on. And so one of the rules of the Senate, and one of the reasons that many of us decided to come to the Senate, was we're supposed to take a longer look at the laws and what the long-term impacts are for not just our regions, as Senator Duncan outlined, but also for everybody, particularly groups like Indigenous people, those who are oftenly economically, socially, politically marginalized. And so part of our role, they call it minority interest. Young people renamed it for me, and I love this. They said it's the intentionally ignored because they don't get people elected yet. And so you'll see two types of laws that come into effect. Ones that are from the government and from the House of Commons. And the way to tell whether it's a government law, if you hear numbers, it starts with a C, it means it came from the House of Commons, from the elected. If it starts with an S, it means it came from the Senate. If it's under 200, it came from the government. If it's over 200, then it's either a member of parliament or a senator who introduced it in what's called a private bill. And private bills often are related to the interest people have when they come to the Senate. I have some personal biases that I think we should be using those bills to benefit all people, particularly those who are intentionally ignored. Not everybody shares that view, and that's not the rules of how you can do private bills, but those are the ways things become laws. And sometimes we pass laws just because people get emotional about things. And I'm not against emotions, but I actually just got an email, for instance, from a woman who appeared at our legal committee yesterday who had been in prison and was testifying and was treated really disrespectfully by many of the people who were on our committee. And if she had been someone who was seen as only a victim, she has also been victimized, she would not have been treated that way by members of the committee. And so now one of the issues that I have to take up is to say, look, if we're going to hear from people who have this experience, I don't want, if an Indigenous woman like this or somebody else comes before the committee, them to be treated disrespectfully and dishonorably because we think they don't deserve a voice. Everybody deserves to have their voice heard. And so that's part of our responsibility in doing these laws, as Michelle said, to make sure those voices are there. The voices that too often are ignored are brought into that discussion.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you for the more technical and the more emotional side of the law passing that you guys are a part of. That's wonderful to hear. I'll pass it next over back to Mary Butterworth to ask their next question, please.
Hi, my name is Morgan, and my question is, why isn't emphasis been placed on the many acts of reconciliation and so forth, despite the fact that one might assume that issues raised concerning education are much more impactful or meaningful to day-to-day lives of the Aboriginal people?
Okay, the audio wasn't super clear on that one, so just to reiterate, the question was asking why there's such an emphasis on reconciliation when there's issues with education as far as Indigenous education, and I think in reconciliation that have not been the focus. Do we have a senator that would like to speak a little bit on the side of education? Senator Duncan, I'll pass it to you.
Perhaps I could address that with what's happening in our region, in the Yukon as well. Again, education is a provincial responsibility. So you wouldn't necessarily hear members of parliament or senators discussing it in the form of a bill or a specific action. I can share with you that the Yukon has established a First Nation Education Council, and they're in their initial stages, but that was a vote taken by school boards. So you need to look at the structure of the school boards, school councils in your particular area in Alberta, and how those are governed, and to direct the question directly to them as to why education isn't more of an Indigenous First Nations education is not more included in the school curriculum and as part of the learning. And another area to look at is languages as well. How many First Nation languages are present, and how many opportunities do you have to hear or learn First Nation languages? And it's unlike French is one language, but we have many First Nation languages in the Yukon, and it's sorting out the dialects and so on. The other thing is the language that we use. For example, some situations you would encounter a prayer offered daily. In the Yukon Legislative Assembly, the prayer is not to our Father or to a God, it's to the Creator, and which is a far more inclusive approach, and something that I would advocate for the Senate as well, but have not quite yet achieved. But to change to use our own language, to use the appropriate language that's reflective of Indigenous elements in our community and where we live, is one step we can take as individuals. And in terms of and setting the example for others, and in terms of education in each of our provinces and territories, we need to work with First Nations, and we need to work with our locally elected politicians, not only MPPs or members of the Legislative Assembly, but the school boards and the school councils. And it starts with you requesting.
If you can write a letter or a little video asking your government in your province or territory the same question you ask us, they will give you an answer. I have no clue what will be the answer. But coming from where I am, it was to make sure that I do not speak my language, which is Inu Emun, that I do not practice my ceremony, my tradition, and all of that, that I became that I should become a good citizen of Canada. So with that, there is no more Indigenous, you know? So it's still happening today, even though we're more polite, or if we stop traffic, you understand that sometimes we're less patient. But the power that you have, you as youth and the next generation, because you're the generation right now posing the right question, and later those questions will be action. And you have power. Don't forget that.
Thank you very much. And I do, just for a little bit of context, since I'm also joining from Alberta, we are kind of in the midst of a curriculum reform, which, to put lightly, does not reflect Indigenous values and beliefs very well. So I do think we are kind of poised at this perfect time to those students joining me from Edmonton to make those statements to the government so that they know that that is something that you feel passionate about. And using some examples from our senators here of some of the education aspects that are happening in their home provinces that they're a part of could be a good way to say, look, we know how to do this in Canada. Let's get it done here in Alberta. So thank you for both of those ideas. I'm sorry, this is something I'm also very passionate about, so I had to put my little thought into that one. Thank you for the great question. I'll pass it next to VSS for their third question, please.
Our third question is, what would you consider to be the most important law in Canada with respect to protecting First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples' rights and protecting First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples' cultures?
Thank you very much. And I think we can maybe say that could be a law that's already been passed, or maybe even something that's in the works as well. Do we have a senator that has a law that they, yes, go for it.
The Constitution, Section 35 of the Constitution recognizes the First Nation land claims are protected under the Constitution.
Yep.
And Kim Pate would give a better answer than I to that, and as would Senators Pate and Odette would give a better answer. That was my immediate one.
Yep. Yep. Do we have any other thoughts on this one?
Michelle, do you want to go?
Yeah. In few words, did you know I'm 51 years old? Grandma 51 years old, but legally I'm only 17 years old because of the Indian Act. I'm not Innu, I'm Indian with the Indian Act. So my dream is that, okay, I'm really 51 years old, so which means I have rights but responsibilities for me and my family and my community, that I can participate to the economy, that I can say yes or no to something that is happening in my region or something like that. So it's many laws, I would say, that would bring that. But at the end of the day, if I can say, trust us. Trust us. We're allowed to disagree, or we're allowed to have fun together, but it's the relationship that is broken. And it's not only one law. It should be many laws that define and respect how the North, the East, the West, and so on, that would make sure that I'm finally a 51-year-old cuckoo.
Senator Pate, do you have thoughts as well?
Well, it's, you know, I as someone trained in law, I was going to go straight to the law as well. And, you know, I want to point out that when the Constitution that has Section 35 in it was introduced, it also has Section 15, which is the equality provisions. And when it was introduced in 1980, when the Constitution was repatriated and when it came back to Canada in 1982 from Britain, where the true sense of the colonial history was that we weren't even in control of our Constitution at that time. When it came back, at that time, Canada recognized, the House of Commons, the Senate, everybody recognized we didn't have equality. Why? Because they said, we can't have the equality provisions come in because we are not equal. Indigenous people aren't equal, other racialized people aren't equal, women aren't equal, kids aren't equal, people with disabilities. So in 1982, that was recognized. And so the equality provisions came in 3 years later. And yet still today we're fighting that fight. And those provisions are the hardest ones for the courts, for people to get their heads around, that until people are in the position that Michelle described, we won't have that equality. And so we keep, money takes precedence, jurisdiction of provinces and territories takes precedence, all of that. And there's no excuse. We should be saying, despite the fact that healthcare, as was raised earlier, education is provincial jurisdiction, the federal government has taxation powers and has the ability to say, we want national standards. And we won't actually give you that portion of the finances unless you meet national standards, whether it's Alberta, whether it's Ontario, whether it's Yukon, whether it's wherever. And where the places are taking leadership, like in the Yukon or other areas, then hold them up and say, look, we're going to privilege these places because they're actually doing a good job of this. And call people out, as Michelle has so, I think many of us are trying to do that in different ways in our social media, that sort of thing. And I just want to, shout out to all of you who do those videos so that we can keep amplifying, because that's really important. So thank you for keep reminding us of that, Michelle.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Again, I love that you have the law background and giving our students a bit of that idea of how things are really working, and the importance of our law and the importance of the federal government. We're not a bunch of separate provinces that all hang out in the same area. We are a country, so there is power in that. I totally agree. Awesome. Okay, I will pass it next to Mary Butterworth for the next question. I think we probably have time for maybe about 2 more.
Hi, my name is Madison, and I was wondering, what adjustments would you like to see be made to the newly funded Aboriginal halfway houses and services programs? Due to the issues of the programs having similar mandates as prior programs, as expressed in the Policy Action 37. Thank you.
Okay, so again, I'm sorry, that one was a little bit muffled as well, but I think the question was, what adjustments would you like to see for the newly funded Aboriginal halfway houses and service programs?
Yeah.
Kim.
Yeah. Okay, well, first, let's get rid of them. Let's put the resources in community so that people can be home. There's a couple of reports, and I'm such a techno twit, but I'll try and put them in the chat after this, that we did. One called 12 Indigenous Women, the Miscarriages of Justice, that show that the links between residential school, child welfare, and the pipeline right into the prison system. And the reality is that we keep putting more and more money into indigenizing our criminal legal system and our prison systems, instead of putting them in community and saying, let's keep people from ending up in there. And if some of you have been watching the stats that just came out, 97% of the women who are put in isolation and solitary confinement in this country are Indigenous women. We're almost at 55% of the federal prison population for women serving 2 years or more. So you're in Edmonton. In Edmonton, that jail, more than 75% of the women there are Indigenous, and almost the last time I was in, all of the women classified as high security are Indigenous. That's not because they pose a danger to the public. Otherwise, you'd all be, if we were jailing people according to who causes the greatest risk, then you would be totally afraid of Indigenous mothers who have histories of past abuse, who have been trying to survive in poverty, because that's who we're overwhelmingly jailing at the fastest rate. Sorry. Do I support halfway houses? Of course I do, but the reality is that's way too late. We need to be investing in young people, in other young people, making sure that it isn't the truth anymore, that it's easier or that more Indigenous kids end up in custody than they do in university. That's wrong. And that's a function of the power and the inequity, the power imbalances and equities that we have in communities and in the systems.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Band-aid solutions do not work. We need to solve the actual problem. Did we have another thought on this question before we move on?
I just put in the link the article of our friend Kim, and from that, I'm sure in the article you'll see also different links.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much. Hey, thank you for a wonderful, great question. We have one last question from VSS, and then with whatever time left, I know Mary Butterworth prepared a few extra questions as well. So I'll pass it to VSS for their last question.
Sorry, we only had 3 questions prepared, so that was our last question.
Oh, sorry about that. Definitely thought there was another. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so Mary Butterworth, we'll send it back to you for the next one. Thanks for being quick on the back and forth in the camera.
My name's Tony, and my question is regarding call to action 64. This is about the requirement for publicly funded denominational schools to teach comparative religious studies, including Aboriginal spiritual beliefs. Would you choose to take this choice out of the hands of individual school authorities and make it mandatory?
And I just want to make sure, were we all able to hear that one okay? That one was a little bit clearer for me, so. So do any of us, okay, so do any of us have thoughts on removing, I'll read it verbatim so we can have it. The requirement for publicly funded denominational schools to teach comparative religious studies, including Aboriginal spiritual beliefs. Would you choose to take that choice out of the hands of individual school authorities and make it mandatory for all schools? Because right now, of course, as we've spoken, it's province to province. We do get that choice of what's being taught at, for example, a Catholic school. Do we think that should be, what are our thoughts on that? And I know we have spoken a little bit. I know, Senator Audette, you spoke a little bit about education earlier, so I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that as well.
But for me, if I have we call it what it says, I don't like to impose. And I work at Laval University. It's a huge university. It's bigger than my community and the huge city beside my community. And they don't like when we say it's mandatory or you must and you have to do. So I talk about responsibility. So how can they be responsible? And I don't want to impose just one red path, Indigenous belief or tradition, because we're so diverse. But at the end of the day, if I was able to say there's no more Catholic religion taught in the school, I'll be walking and say yay or dancing makusham. I'm not against the religion. It's just that if you bring one, bring all of it.
Yeah, go ahead, Senator Duncan.
If I might add, I think, again, it's Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow, the historical document that I referenced. Chief Elijah Smith presented that not in a confrontational manner or a mandatory manner. It was, let's negotiate. And while it took too long, many, many years to negotiate and to reach these agreements, we've reached them and we see the examples every day in our lives. Yukon University has, and Amandia campus, I'm not saying it correctly, but the campus is there. Yukon University houses the First Nation Language Center, and it's a learning center, it's a teaching center. Our stop signs in the Yukon are written stop and there's First Nation language below. Kluane National Park has the name in English and in a First Nation language, the historical name of the landmark. It's a way of living. So I'm of the same philosophy as Senatrice Audette, in that mandatory to me is not it's not walking together the path of reconciliation, and it's not honoring and respecting. To make something mandatory, I would rather an approach that was respectful and appreciating that someone may have a different view or a different religion. We need to share the space, and we need to create the space for all views to be presented, and for all religions to be presented, the languages to be presented, and to be respectful of those. I would rather that approach.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I don't disagree in principle with what either of my colleagues have said, but I would say that we need to take a more proactive position about what we provide in education. People are making decisions about how we educate. We are based in judgments and values. And so the fact that I didn't learn about Indigenous history in this country except through a white colonial negative lens, I would say, until I started looking for that as an adult. Now, hopefully that's changed for generations, but it certainly hadn't changed even by the time my kids, who are 32 and 24 respectively, were in elementary school. And I think we do have an obligation to say, we should be making sure basically the history is written from a white male middle class or upper middle class perspective, and we need to keep correcting that. And so that's not mandatory, but that's,
Kim, on that, I'm with you. It's about the spirituality or the spiritual belief that there's, but on the history, that, oh my God, we have to redo it. I try at Laval University, and 17 faculties, there's only 2 who said I'm in. So but for me, it belongs to the provincial government, and the federal needs to jump. But on the spiritual part, there's sacred thing, if I may, to the student who asked that question, that I'm not sure it wants to be, or it needs to be in the school to be taught. There's sacred. It's more about that where I said, for me, I cannot impose, but how we teach the school in Canada, I think we're late on many places. I will say in Quebec for sure. We missed the boat a year ago. We were able to bring the Indigenous beauty and passion or true story and history, and we were told no. 2022. Ouch.
Yeah. No. I have a resource I'd like to share, because I do think some of our students and even a couple of our senators, if you haven't read it, it's a book called Wayuwa. It's by Joe Crona, and it's about Indigenous pedagogies in education. It recently published, I think it came out last year. And one thing that really has been resonating in my head based on what you were all saying is something that she shared in that book, of an educator saying, well, why is it my job to teach Cree language when I have students from all over the world? And her words were, well, the people coming from around the world, if they're immigrating from India or Mexico or Scotland, they have a home for that culture where that culture is celebrated and taught, right? These cultures don't have a home where they're being celebrated and taught. So if we don't do them here, they're not being done anywhere, and they're dying. So I think that is important. So if that's something that you would like to learn more about, I do highly suggest that book. It's called Wayuwa. I just thought I should share that because it really resonated with me, and I think you would all really enjoy that quite a bit. I do know we're a little bit over schedule, but we do have a little bit of time for one last message from each of our senators. If you have one takeaway you would like to share with our students joining us, now's your chance. Maybe we'll just start in the same order that we did our introduction. So I'll pass it to Senator Audette first for your final thoughts.
Oh, merci beaucoup. Thank you. I hear a lot of people that from different culture, not Indigenous, but from Canada or that live in Canada, with the guilt or feel bad or I'm not sure, should I, because I'm not Indigenous. It's the moment. It's normal. And we will be like this for a few years or decades. But if we don't step in that, I'm not comfortable, it's the status quo. So me too, I'm not comfortable in a good way, of course, because I'm not an expert in all Indigenous culture. So it's normal that I might do wrong step or not the right step. So we have to forgive, and we have to make sure that me as half Inou, half Québécoise, I'm here to teach or walk beside you. And I need you to walk beside me also.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll pass it next to Senator Pate for your final thoughts.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what Michelle said is fantastic. If you're not uncomfortable when you're talking about or working on these issues, you're probably not working on them. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but if it doesn't take you out of your comfort zone, then you're probably not really pushing. And you know, I make mistakes all the time. Most everything I've learned is from making mistakes. That doesn't mean I want to make mistakes all the time, but it's the way that I have learned. Most of what I've learned is by trying new things and trying to do things in new ways, and being able to walk for the past 30 years with people like Michelle, and for the past 5 years with people like Pat as well, is part of learning how to be a good ally and also how to continue to do the work. So I think if you always start with the thought that there's no way you can know everything, and anybody, like when people have said to me, how do you start to learn about Indigenous issues? I think, I don't know, this is what I'm trying to do, but I'm still learning, and I'll be learning till the day I die, I hope. And so, that's, and young people, in my mind, one of the things I love, and I actually trained as a teacher before I went to law school. I was going to teach to make money to go to law school. It was just a bad reason, but I love teaching. Anyway, that's a story you don't need to hear. But I went, and I loved it because, somewhere along the way, we lose the authenticity of just asking the question, being blunt, saying it, not being worried about what everybody else thinks. And young people do that, and I think that's incredibly valuable. And the more we do that, and the more we open ourselves up to being questioned, to being challenged, to being corrected, is really important. And so for me, that's part of how I've learned.
Thank you very much. And Senator Duncan, will pass to you next.
Thank you so much. And I would conclude by using the key messages shared by my colleagues. And from Senatrice Odette, it's about walking the path together. And that's so incredibly important. And from Senatrice Pate, it's listening, and it's hearing, and it's asking the questions. While I'm so very, very proud of the work that the Yukon has done and is still doing, please, for a minute, don't think that it hasn't been challenging and at times very hard, and we haven't all agreed. And we as a society are still, it's a work in progress. Like, I consider myself to be a work in progress. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to be an ally and to work with First Nations and all Yukoners, Canadians, and trying to work in public service. And again, it's about listening. And I keep saying that someday for Christmas I'm going to get patience, but that's part of the things I'm working on. And I so grateful again to all of you for the questions and for sharing your experience, your challenges with all of us, and for the opportunity to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I would also like to give a huge thank you to our participating schools, our representative schools, for developing such amazing questions. They sent them to me and I was completely blown away. So you all should be so proud of the work you're already doing. Keep up the amazing work, because clearly our country is in good hands if this is where the future is going. We do just have one last minute. I would love to get a quick photo of everyone participating. So if you are able to, can you get your cameras turned on? Mary Butterworth, it'd be great if you guys could maybe all come around the camera. Is it possible to get you guys up close to the camera to get a quick picture? Yeah, and any of our other participants, if you do have camera capabilities, feel free to turn them on now. It would be very nice to see all of your faces. Now we get to see all of the primping. Yes, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, and welcome back, Sarah, from the tech void you were in. Okay, you guys got it. Oh yeah, he's moving it up. Okay, perfect. Okay, let me get my thing ready here.
Oh, wow.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'll take a few. So smile, everybody. Great. Thank you so much. I've got it. We're good to go. I'll make sure I forward it to our schools and our Cengage team. Thank you again so much for everyone for participating today. Senators, you are absolutely amazing. We really appreciate you taking the time to hear from students and share all of your diverse expertise. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to everybody else who was able to make it out. Wonderful.